We'll go ahead and get things started. I'm Emily with NC Tech. Thanks for joining our virtual workshop today, presented by our member Trend Micro with CDW. This is one of our member offerings, our programs that our members are able to bring you some awesome information on a lot of great topics, and we've got a great group here today. So just a couple housekeeping things. You're coming in on mute. We'd love for you to share your video. This will hopefully be a collaborative sort of workshop. I know that our hosts will give you some guidance here on how questions and everything will be going. And Brittany's put a polling link there in the chat if you want to have that open. I know they'll be getting some great things going here. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lou with Trend Micro. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, thanks, Emily. I appreciate the introduction. And yes, please, if you have a moment, jump into the chat box and go ahead and take part in the poll that Brittany has put out there. So I appreciate, as your Trend Micro rep, one of a number of Trend Micro reps and technical folks, we really appreciate your attendance today. So the goal of the call is to kind of give you guys an understanding of what Trend Micro and CDW can do together to help organizations secure their environments and at the same time leverage the new state contract, the 208M contract. So with that, joining us today, we have Mike Gibson and Kevin Summers. They'll be the ones that are presenting. Mike is the Vice President of Threat Research for Trend Micro and has been gracing us with his presence since 2009. And Kevin Summers is the Field Solutions Architect for CDW in North and South Carolina. And particularly Kevin covers security. So along with those two, Kyle Irwin, the account rep for CDW state government accounts, and myself, the very large enterprise account manager for Trend, will also be speaking briefly with you. So thanks again for attendance today. And yeah, with that, I think we have a couple of slides to share, correct?
Lou, I'll go ahead and pull up the polling if you want to walk through these first, and then we'll share it. We'll just make sure that you guys are able to see my screen.
Oh, yeah, great, thanks.
Are you seeing my polling screen?
Yes.
All right. So yeah, if you want to go ahead and add in where you're joining from, where in North Carolina, or if you're on our team and outside of North Carolina, feel free to join at pollev.com, and then you'll see the / Brittany HIMM168. We just have a few that we'll run through pretty quickly. Some representation from Mecklenburg. You can also text your answers. If you want to text, again, Brittany HIMM168 and text 22333. Move on to the next one. The biggest security concern for 2021. And as the words get larger, that means that's being entered numerous times. So we can see ransomware here as one of the top concerns for 2021. Continued ransomware theft. Raleigh was probably meant for the last one.
I don't know. I've heard some concerning things about Raleigh, so I don't know.
Response. Are you considering replacing your endpoint solution this year? Like to get an idea of what cloud provider you're using, if any. There's an option as well for multi, other, or none. Some multi and Microsoft. Mix here, multi, Microsoft, none. I think that is actually the last one. Oh, one more, sorry. Are you currently monitoring for misconfigurations in the cloud? So Lou, before I unshare my screen and pass over to Mike, just for you to cover some of our slides, anything you want to add here around the polling?
Yeah, I really appreciate the input. You know, it's great to see folks engaged and answer some of these questions. I think, you know, one in particular, that last question around cloud is one that we'll be able to provide some interesting thoughts around, as well as address some of the state mandates that have come out around NIST 800-53. So, and I appreciate you sharing that information, Brittany.
Lou? Okay, Mike, thanks for sharing the screen.
No worries.
All right.
Cool.
Take it away.
Well, hey, appreciate that, Brittany. Thanks for the polling questions there. You know, what we're here to talk about is how do we secure your organizations, and how do we do that? Well, we can start with the contract. So 208M is a state contract for endpoint security, but it also includes things such as cloud security, EDR, XDR, managed detection and response. And so we're going to talk a little bit about today how Trend can help solve with CDW some of the challenges that come in managing those types of solutions. There's a lot of them. So from a contract perspective, Kyle, maybe you can share some of what you see as the advantages for organizations who take advantage of this contract.
Yeah, Lou, absolutely. And Kyle Irwin here, Field Account Executive for CDW, along with my inside counterpart, Nicole. Yeah, this is a good, probably what, Lou, year and a half, almost 2 years in the making for putting this all together here. And knowing North Carolina, we went in very aggressive with discounts and the pricing that you'll be seeing on there. And another really cool advantage that's up there, the free home use licenses to take advantage of as well. And any government affiliated organization can use this throughout SLED and K through 12 higher ed. And you guys will see on the state contract website, I think it's just myself and Nicole listed there, and we do cover all the state accounts, but we have over 30, north of 30 account managers who cover the greater SLED patch in general. So you can just touch base with Nicole or myself, and we'll coordinate with the right resources and put you guys in touch from there. But yeah, we're very excited to partner with Trend Micro on this, because not only aggressive pricing, but they can really address most of the security concerns out in the market these days. So again, very excited to.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Kyle. Just so you guys have our information as well as points of contact, Kyle, you see his contact information there as well as mine. So please, if you want to see a recording of this or you have questions specific to the contract, don't hesitate to reach out to either of us. So with that, Mike, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thanks, Lou. Thanks, Kyle, everyone, Brittany. I just wanted to say, so you'll notice that for this session, we're actually in kind of a meeting mode versus a webinar mode. That's because I honestly prefer interactive dialogue and conversation, and Kevin and I kind of talked about that beforehand. We would really prefer for people to get engaged and involved and ask questions. And I know that can be tricky in a Zoom environment, so we will try to stop and pause and take some breaks in order for people to chime in. But feel free to interrupt if you need to, and raise your hand in the chat, whatever it takes to get engaged in the conversation. It's much better to have the back and forth dialogue than just listen to Kevin and I drone on about technology. So with that, let's dive in. And so in my role at Trend, I get an opportunity to talk to a lot of customers, and I get to very often, I must look empathetic or something, because they like to share their pain. They always like to tell me the problems that they're having, and we typically try to work through to how can we solve those. And over, I'd say, the last 18 months or so, these have really been the three that bubble up to the top when I'm chatting with customers, right? The first one is, I just need better. I need more from my endpoint protection platform. I need better visibility. I need more protection. I need even, detection and response capabilities. And we'll get into why in a second. The second one is just, I'm migrating to the cloud. Will my existing security controls work for the cloud? What are some of the gotchas or caveats we're going to run into while we try to take what, our security stack from on-premise as we transition into leveraging cloud workloads? And then the third one is, how can we be just, we're building new apps. I've got business units building more apps in the cloud, natively using cloud services. How can we be more secure? Because you hear some horror stories related to misconfigurations, that type of stuff. When you're building and leveraging these cloud services, how can we make ourselves more secure? So those are kind of the three kind of pains that that we kind of envision talking about today. Kevin, anything that you hear differently, or I'm glad some of these align to some of the answers we got in the polling.
No, just that I spoke with our InfoSec practice just to get some updated information on what they're seeing when they're doing penetration tests and when they're doing security assessments. And by far, people still remain the weakest link. That's where they're able to do the most breaching when they're doing their penetration testing. So having protection that goes across your entire environment remains to be the most important thing to help protect your organization from your own employees.
Yep, absolutely. And I think, so the first kind of point, and I think that leads in nicely to kind of our first topic, which is really around how do you get that better protection, detection, response, visibility on the endpoint side, because the users are continue to be one of the the targeted ways that people try to infiltrate. And when I think we saw it in the poll, the number one reason why people want better endpoint protection or better holistic protection these days continues to be ransomware, right? So we saw at Trend Micro, where we have a unique opportunity to see things that happen on the consumer side of the business and then make their transition to the commercial side. So we get to see trends happening to individuals, what kind of attacks that they're seeing, how are threat actors monetizing their attacks. And then they typically go, okay, I made small money over here. I want to make bigger money over on the commercial side of the business. And so that started with ransomware, where they would just encrypt an individual user's files, right? And they'd hold that organization for ransom. They'd say, hey, give me $800, give me $1,000, give me $2,000. I'll let this person. And it was really opportunistic, right? They weren't targeting organizations. They were just kind of finding the weaker links and kind of spraying their attacks out over the internet. Over the last, especially in 2021, we witnessed a huge pivot to what we would call targeted ransomware, right? And so in this case, what they're doing is all of a sudden you show up for work one day and all servers, all data, all workstations, all crippled at the same time, right? And this is where, threat actors have been able to pivot to ask for $500,000, $1 million, multi-million-dollar ransoms, because they're holding the whole organization hostage at this point. They can't actually function. And to go and start to recover from backup and all that stuff is a huge undertaking when you're talking about maybe up to 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 employees that are all impacted. So we kind of like to take a look at how does, what's different about targeted ransomware versus that opportunistic stuff. And this is kind of, I know there's a lot of detail here. We won't get into every step, but this is kind of how targeted ransomware plays out, right? So they have this initial access period where it's the same way they would get in many different scenarios, right? Phishing emails, weaponized Word docs, drive-by downloads, all kinds of ways to get that initial access. And then they start to load their tool set, right? You get Emotech gets loaded in there, you get TrickBot that ends up in the environment. And all of this is, and they're moving laterally, they're harvesting data, they're setting up, they're looking at the security systems that are in place, how can they maybe compromise those? And a lot of times they're stealing credentials. They're trying to get to the domain credentials, really is their ultimate goal. Because once you have that overall targeted ransomware attack, or that next stage, which is the ransomware execution, becomes so much easier. And that's, what we're seeing on average is it can actually be as short as 1 or 2 days. But on average, we're seeing it's between 7 and 30 days later when they've been inside that organization, they've plotted everything out, they've planned it, and then a whole different group comes in, the ransomware execution team, and they could have purchased access from the black market. There's many ways that they get that access, but then they drop their payload, right? And this is where this happens. They're always smart about timing. They know exactly when to execute this. They do it on a weekend when people aren't around. People show up on Monday and they just can't work, right? And this is the problem that many of our customers are coming to us and saying, hey, we need to better endpoint security to focus on this. Kevin, anything you would like to add here?
Just that the customers that I've been working with in the Carolinas, or some that I've heard of in other markets, the recovery time for ransomware is 3 to 4 months. I'm working with a company right now. It's a commercial organization who was hit on September 13th, and they are just finishing getting their workstations rebuilt over the next couple of weeks, and looking at replacing firewalls and endpoint because everything they had was 10 years old. So the time frame that you're down is one of the bigger problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm not a big fan of FUD, right? I don't like to sell fear. That's not the whole purpose of this slide. Actually, why I like to bring up this slide is more about opportunity. So, that opportunistic ransomware would arrive and hit right away, and it would kind of announce itself and say, hey, give me $800 for this one workstation's worth of data. When you have this 7 to 30 days of dwell time, it's actually an opportunity to be able to detect these stages that are happening earlier and use them as early warning indicators before the ransomware payload shows up. It's an opportunity to be informed and take action, right? And so that's where we're really trying to enhance our endpoint security. Is if, obviously we want to protect as much as we can, but if we can't, then you need to be able to highlight these early warnings, right? That you have that 7 to 30 day window to be able to identify when the threat actor is lurking around your environment, trying to steal credentials, harvest data, and so on. And so we get into that conversation with, okay, what does your endpoint security really need to do in order to, one, protect, and then detect and allow you to respond, right? So on the protection side, it's got, you really need a comprehensive strategy here. You need things like virtual patching, right? So, Windows updates on workstations, you try to push them out as much as possible, or Chrome updates, Edge updates, whatever browser you're using, you want to push them. But there's a lag time, and so we try to leverage virtual patching capabilities in our products to be able to kind of buy time for that. Similar device control, right? Making sure that you're controlling the devices being plugged into the system. Firewall, app control, exploit prevention. So if you got some malicious scripts running in your browser, you want to be able to stop those drive-by downloads, right? So that's kind of the protection layer. Then you get into the more of the analysis side, right? Leveraging machine learning to identify whether it's pre-execution or during execution, identify malicious files in the system. Behavior analysis, unfortunately, we see way too many of our customers not take advantage of this. And I understand there may have been, going back a decade ago, challenges with behavior monitoring on endpoints. I think the technology, not just ours, but the technology in general, I think has improved a lot more over the years to allow that behavioral analysis to run, because it is critical in order to identify when those malicious, tactics are being used on these systems. Then you get into things like fileless, leveraging PowerShell, leveraging command line techniques in order to run their malicious code, and you living off the land, if you will, using that stuff. You got to be able to monitor the network activity in and out of your endpoints, and obviously known threats. This is traditional AV stuff, right? Being able to just block malware about. And then you get into, obviously DLP is useful. You want to be able to, if Kevin, you mentioned the time that it takes to recover if ransomware executes on a system. Well, you want to, your endpoint solution can help with that. It can actually store information about these files that are being encrypted and help you restore them quickly once you've identified the malware itself. Obviously quarantining files. Connected threat defense, what we mean there is you really want intelligence sharing amongst your solutions, right? You want one solution. If you see something on system A, you want to share that intelligence with system B. If you see something on the network, you want to share it with your endpoints and so on. And you really need that ecosystem to be sharing that localized threat intel, because threat actors change their IPs and domains and all that stuff very, very frequently. So when they choose one to attack you, you want to be able to share that intelligence across your systems. And then obviously, if something comes down to it where you have an alert, you want to be able to investigate. You want to be able to dive a little bit deeper. Kevin, anything that your customers kind of request on the endpoint side, or any of these that you see being kind of valuable?
So we've talked about this a couple of times. I'm so impressed with the virtual patching. If you haven't seen virtual patching before, if you have older operating systems or if you have current operating systems, most of the malware, ransomware attacks I've seen would have been prevented if the Windows update, if the machines had been kept up to date. The exploits that are being used have already been fixed, but the updates haven't been applied. With a virtual patching, real time with the agent, you're getting the information about what's needed to patch the exploit or possible exploit, and having that protection in place, even if you haven't done your Windows update yet. I know, Mike, I keep talking about that every time we've gotten on a call together, but that's really valuable technology, because like I said, most of the ransomware attacks would have been stopped if the machines were up to date, and they weren't.
Yeah, absolutely. And we invest a lot of money in that area just around the research needed to identify the details of the vulnerability. And for the record, Kevin had told me he enjoys that feature and function long before I even told him that I run that research team at Trend Micro. So it wasn't a planted question. I'm going to just pause here. Any questions from the attendees so far about what we've kind of covered? Anybody want to share stories about ransomware? I'm always interested. I know it's tough. I know it's a tricky dynamic. I'd much rather have people in a room. You can raise your hand and jump in. But
hey, Mike, I've got one. I know that from a government perspective or an affiliated government perspective, one of the big pushes from DIT has been around NIST 853, right? And I think one of the things that's striking to me is that when we look at this slide, there's a lot of mitigating controls that can help organizations ensure that they adhere to those policies, right? So that just jumped out at me.
Yeah, I mean, it's not much of a question. It's more of a statement, but absolutely, I agree with you, Lou. And it's a good point. It's a good point that, as you work through that compliance requirement, we do have a lot of capabilities. And actually, I think it'll tie together a little bit more in the next couple of slides, where you really see how the layered approach kind of checks a lot of those boxes. And then we're actually going to talk a little bit more about NIST 853 Rev 4 when we get into kind of the compliance side of things, and especially around cloud security as well. So absolutely, it's a great framework. It's a great compliance framework in order to be able to check, what should I be doing on my endpoints? Not just take it from us who as a vendor, we have all these capabilities, but also look at, what is the industry recommending? And so, yeah, I know that everybody, go ahead, Kevin.
I saw some mutes go off. Did anybody have questions, comments?
I got a quick question. Someone had told me, and I was just get you guys' advice, saying that 60% of small businesses don't typically make it 6 months after some sort of cyber attack. I mean, is that an accurate number?
It's a statistic. I can't say for sure that I've never quantified it myself, but absolutely, I've heard the same one. In fact, even if you look at large organizations, like I think it was travel. Now, 2020 was an interesting year with COVID and travel organizations, but TravelX had a really significant ransomware incident earlier this year. And in their bankruptcy filing, they actually said that it was their, they ended up having to pay the ransom, which was multi-million dollars to get back up and running. But one of the reasons they said that their business suffered so much and why they had to declare bankruptcy was because of that ransomware attack. So yeah, it's if you're not prepared for it, if you could lose all of the data, all of your client databases, all of the invoicing, that you need, especially a small business that might be running that on 1 or 2 systems. If all of a sudden you lose all records of who owes you money, that could be crippling, right? People don't just line up to pay you if they don't, if in those situations. So yeah, I mean, 60%, I don't know if I could quantify it, but I know it can be have a significant impact for a small business.
And it can have an impact on large business. I did some work with a hospital a couple of years ago that their MRI machines actually ran Windows XP for the console that controlled the MRI. And they were down for 17 days, and it cost them $2 million. They lost $2 million a day because waiting for those MRI machines to come back up. So $34 million just because of that one breach, and they ended up paying.
Well, and this is the challenge, right? The more we pay, so we pay. Not only are they encouraged to continue, but now they're well funded. Right now they can hire more individuals to help them with their scenarios and go and infiltrate organizations. So unfortunately, a lot of organizations are forced to end up having to pay, but that's just, ultimately causing the problem to get bigger. Threat actors always follow the money, right? So coin mining and ransomware are the two hot things right now. They're going to try to steal your security resource or system resources to do mining, or they're going to try to ransom it in some way to get you to pay them. And they're always financially. Many of the things that we see in the world today are financially motivated. There's obviously other motivations, hacktivism, political, whatever, but so much of it is driven by threat actors wanting to make money.
Which even paying the ransom carries its own risks. Back October 1st last year, the Department of Treasury put out a notice that you should be calling the FBI and the Department of Treasury if you are breached with ransomware, because if you pay the ransomware, you can actually be taken to civil court for possibly funding terrorists.
Yeah.
So that was an interesting document when that came out, kind of surprising. The Department of Treasury Office of Foreign Asset Control issued this highlight on October 1st of last year.
Yeah.
So that might be something you'd want to look up.
Yeah, absolutely. That's worth taking a read for sure, especially as it comes to, paying the ransom and what the consequences could be. So anyway, we'll, for the sake of time, we'll continue on. But obviously, we had a bunch of controls on that last slide. And the first thing that people always say is, yeah, you're going to kill my system trying to do all that stuff, right? And so it really takes a smart approach, we use this funnel to explain how we do it, but some of those controls are pretty simple, right? Black and white, you want to known good, known bad. You just want to kind of take care of it really quickly, low performance overhead, things like web and file reputation, the application control, some of our variant protection, identifying variants. That's all easy to do, and it doesn't take much system overhead. So we eliminate a lot of the stuff up in that layer, and then we get into the more expensive resource intensive operations. Pre-execution machine learning, behavioral analysis, runtime machine learning. You only want to do those things when absolutely necessary. And so that's why when you look at a security solution, you got to make sure that it's got this layered approach, and it's not just trying to do behavioral analysis or machine learning for everything, because that's going to tax the system, right? And the one thing that users complain about is performance. If you're impacting the performance of a server or an endpoint, and the user can't actually do their job, or they're impacted, they're going to demand it be removed, and that's what causes a lot of grief, right, for the security team. So this is how we approach that, in that we try to knock off the low-hanging fruit in the easy ways, low performance overhead ways, and then get to the more complex stuff as needed. And that kind of leads us to, customers they want to do all this stuff, but they want to also have automation because, resources are slim. So how can we automate? How can we integrate this with as much of our existing infrastructure as possible? We want it to be insightful. I don't want to have 12 management consoles. I need to have centralized visibility and control. And if possible, if I don't have the staff to kind of monitor this, do you have an MDR, a managed detection and response offering that can help give me some oversight here? And the last thing is, this one, took us a while to catch up, if I'm being totally honest, but they want an all-in-one solution. They want a single agent. They don't want to have to manage 5 agents, especially from, they don't want to manage 5 agents from one vendor. They especially don't want to manage 5 agents from multiple vendors. And we get back to that performance and working together and making sure that things go through that funnel. It's really hard to do that if you're using separate technologies or separate, even separate agents from the same vendor. So, the demand has been really, give me that one all-in-one endpoint security agent that is going to cover EPP, it's going to cover EDR, and so on. And then, however, there is one challenge when it comes to endpoint protection is that, going back to the targeted ransomware slide, is a lot of times these things are throwing out alerts, right? It's saying, hey, I detected Emotet here, I detected, Quackbot here, whatever. And people are, a lot of times security teams are stretched. And what they do is they say, hey, the AV kicked in and stopped it. But they don't leverage that intelligence or that information as a sign that things are actually happening inside their environment. They're in that 7 to 30-day dwell time, right? And so how we're trying to address this is through our XDR platform, right? It's a security and analytics and threat intelligence platform, our Vision One XDR platform. And so what we do is we collect all that information and we try to present you with that alert. Instead of saying, hey, we detected Quackbot, we want to tell you, hey, we detected the early stages of a possible ransomware attack, right? Which one's going to get your attention more? And so that's where we're trying to leverage the analytics and add this stuff onto our existing security capabilities to be able to provide more, actionable intelligence, if you will. And so we want to do that. We want to take that and consume all of the information, not just from our endpoints, but our server security platform, our cloud security platform. Email security is super important here, right? And then our network security platform. And I'll talk about, how things, add value the more data you see, right? So for example, the endpoints, obviously the most actively attacked. That's where the users are. That's where the threat actors see weakness. So they, we want to collect that endpoint information. But email is still the source. So yeah, the user is the one clicking on the email and reading the email and clicking the attachment, but the email is the vector, right? So by bringing together the email telemetry along with the endpoint telemetry, you can really get a picture of, okay, this user did this, but how many other people got that email? How can I quarantine that email across my whole organization that wasn't known as bad when it came in? How can I understand how many people actually received it, opened it, and so on? And that's where this combination of email and endpoint really helps, kind of address the overall threat vector along with, the execution side of things. And then you can bring in data from your, your cloud workloads and so on. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then network, right? What is happening on the network as far as lateral movement that allows me to see, okay, this endpoint, this is where things started. This email started things on this endpoint, but then the threat actor kind of try to move around and gain access to credentials here or do whatever. You bring all these things together. It all works individually, and the XDR platform can provide you analytics capabilities and insight through each one of these, but when you bring the more of the pieces together, that's when you get more, you see more of the puzzle, right? You see more of that attack playing out, if you will. Kevin, anything to add?
No, just that I know that people see a lot of information on that lower corner with cloud and workload and containers, whereas workloads are your servers, whether it's a server in the cloud, whether it's a server on-prem. So you would have an agent that's on that server. With containers, then you would also have the same protection using the same intelligence inside the container, and then not on that is also functions like AWS Lambda, where you can actually have the protection inside the function. So whether you're not just protecting the server, you're not just protecting the container that's running on that server, you're not just protecting the function. That's the full protection I was talking about, where you have to protect yourself from your end users, is having that multi-layered defense.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Okay, and then, you know, obviously we need another funnel. So all of this stuff goes into our analytics engine, the raw telemetry, detection alerts, all of that stuff. It gets filtered by our rules. Our security experts write these rules based on what they see happening as in real attacks, and then out comes your correlated detections, right? So it's bringing more of this information together. It's really, honestly, you know, it's SIM is great, right? Collecting all this log data. This is writing a really comprehensive rule engine on top of that data that's collected and just using it to identify security alerts, right? And that's what we want to do is output. Here's what you need to action. Instead of talking about that, like I said, that Emotech detection, let's talk about the fact that there's potentially ransomware happening inside your environment in 7 to 30 days. Let's give you that kind of heads up. That's our approach. That's what our focus is.
Hey,
Okay.
Mike, something real quick to kind of, well, I'm sure you'll touch on it, is the state of North Carolina has a House bill. It's, I think it's 216, if I'm not mistaken. But essentially what it does is it mandates information sharing across state agencies and government affiliated organizations. And I think one of the things that's always interesting to hear is how Trend does that, because I know that's a big part of our story. So if I'm jumping the gun, let me know. But if I'm not, I think it's something we could.
No, you're not actually. I don't have that in here just for the sake of I'm trying to cram as much as possible into the 1 hour, but you're absolutely right. And I touched on it a little bit earlier, which is that connected kind of threat intelligence sharing. But yeah, inside, that's another aspect of, I mentioned that Vision One XDR is a security analytics and threat intelligence platform. That really helps enable that intel sharing, right? So we definitely gather the intelligence, especially from all of the telemetry that's feeding into it, and make it shareable, make it consumable. We've got APIs that can do it. We've got, you can just see the raw intelligence right there in the console. So yeah, enabling that, the platform can certainly make that easier, especially if it's mandated, right? Hey, what you see in your environment, you have to share with others. It can help enable and facilitate that for sure.
Awesome.
And on the same idea of sharing, I also work with some of the SOAR products. I don't know whether any, primarily Phantom and Demisto, which is now owned by Palo Alto. And both Phantom and Demisto have already pre-built integrations with Trend's XDR.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if that's something you're considering.
No, I said SOAR SIM at the bottom, or I said SIM at the bottom.
Yep.
It's SOAR as well, right? So all of these alerts can just be fed into a Phantom or Demisto and then be actioned, or at least gather additional intelligence through those platforms. Absolutely,
yep.
Yeah. We those two are high on our list. Working with Splunk, working with Demisto, working with Fortinet, Fortisor. Those are a priority for us. And IBM is the other one that we want to make sure that we all have integrations for, because that's what our customers typically are running. Okay, so I think we're close to time, but we'll jump over to the cloud security side. So I won't spend too much time. Again, I don't like FUD, but obviously cloud's changing the dynamic, right? You've got teams that are building applications, deploying them the next day, updating them frequently, trying to track compliance in those cloud. You got multi-cloud vendors. There's new vectors for data leakage or breaches. You misconfigure an S3 bucket, or and your data's out there in the public for someone to stumble upon. There's all kinds of challenges related to just kind of making sure things are compliant when you move to the cloud. And so when we start to break down, okay, how do we see the strategic priorities for people building in the cloud? It really comes into 3 categories. One is cloud migration, right? So cloud, organizations that are moving workloads to the cloud, they're not cutting over overnight. They're not saying, hey, Friday we're going to shut down our data center. Saturday we're going to open it. Everything's going to be in AWS or Azure or whatever, and then we'll be good. Things are moving over time. A lot of times you're going to operate in that hybrid environment. So hybrid cloud ends up being the normal. So you kind of need that protection to be applicable to physical, to virtual, and to cloud, multi-cloud, right? Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, and then your on-premise VMware infrastructure. The second category is really cloud native applications, right? So I want to build something. I'm going to leverage infrastructure as code. I'm going to spin up resources. I'm going to, obviously not reinvent the wheel. A lot of people are reusing open source or public code repositories, pulling stuff in, not understanding the implications of that code that they're using, what could be the security vulnerabilities that exist, but it helps them to move fast, so the developers are leveraging it. And so because they're moving so fast, some of the security implications get left behind. And you got all of the tool set that the DevOps teams are using, right? GitHub, Jenkins, Jira, Ansible, Puppet, Chef, Slack. All of these things are kind of new, and you have to understand what are the security implications of that. Cloud workloads can be running in all those major cloud platforms. You've got the cloud storage being leveraged, containers running in Docker, Kubernetes, Google Kubernetes Engine, GKE, and so on. AWS Fargate. And then, some of the serverless functions, you got Lambda running, you've got Azure Functions running, Google Serverless running. All of these things put together kind of create, they could all be leveraged just to build one application. A great example is we just ran our sales kickoff last week, and we built an application to be leveraged over our sales kickoff, and it used, I think, something like 200 cloud workloads. It used multi-cloud storage. It used containers to run certain parts of the microservices. And then we had, I think 300 Lambda functions that were leveraged. And this is just for an application that lived for 3 days, right? And this is kind of the new norm. This is what's happening when you're building natively in the cloud. And then you've got the cloud operational excellence teams, right? They're the ones that have been tasked with almost the impossible. How can we make sure that we're not, duplicating infrastructure? How do we optimize cost? It's so easy to spin up a workload. How are you making sure that it's being leveraged and doesn't need to be spun down or resized or all of that stuff? How can we make it repeatable and consistent? How can we make sure that we've got the same security controls or capabilities across multi-cloud? And they're really trying to build that cloud center of excellence to optimize and take advantage of the scale of the cloud and the cost benefits. But at the same time, they don't want to be wasteful. And this is where things like, NIST 853 Rev 4 come in. PCI, HIPAA, all the governance requirements. These are the teams that are focused on those aspects as the other teams are migrating or building natively in the cloud. Any questions there, comments? I know that was a mouthful. So
no, this is,
go ahead, Kim.
Oh, I was just going to say, and CDW is partnered with Trend. That me? So CDW has partnered with Trend on this. We can offer, so they have their cloud conformity, which runs 600 checks or over 600 checks against your cloud platform and make sure that you're following best practices and have things configured. And we're offering that for no charge. All you have to do is go out to our website and sign up, and we'll run a check against your environment and provide you with a report, and that does not go to sales. So the salesperson isn't going to be calling you up and trying to sell you something immediately, but we're confident that once you see the results, it's something you might be interested in, but at least you could get a check against your Azure, your GCP, your AWS environment and see if it is configured according to the best practices.
Yeah, that's great. A great point. And we'll actually, we'll even a little bit later, probably 5 minutes from now, we'll talk about what are some of those checks and what is conformity all about. So
sorry, jump the gun.
No problem. Okay, we had risk and compliance up there and governance. It makes sense. So now I want to circle back to I mentioned those 3 problems at the beginning, right? 3 pains that customers really ask me about all the time, and this one. Okay, so. Will my existing security controls work as I transition to the cloud, as I move, my workloads into the cloud? And this is where things get tricky, right? Oh, oops, slide build problem there. Obviously there's the same operational challenges that you have when you're introducing new environments. You got Azure, you got AWS. I've got multi-cloud, I've got hybrid. How can my security stack that I'm using on-premise translate to those environments? And sometimes they can, sometimes they're optimized for it, but you really need to check, right? And this is where, it gets into, they're the same problems. The problems you'll face when migrating your workloads to the cloud are very similar to the problems you'll still face inside the data center, right? You're gonna get people trying to exploit your system to run their crypto mining. They're gonna try to ransom the information that's running on those cloud workloads. You still have to worry about patching when you spin up an AWS instance to make sure that it stays current, right? And then, obviously as malware, comes and goes, there's malicious communications that are still going to happen from those environments that you're not going to see with your on-premise security controls. And so you really have to think about, okay, if I'm migrating to the cloud, the security capabilities that I have, are they optimized to operate in that environment as well, right? And this is a super busy slide, but the only point I want to make on this is when you look at that security control, like something we have where we have Cloud One workload security, it has to be able to support all of those things we talked about, right? Containers, the hybrid, hybrid cloud environment with your virtual servers, your physical servers, your cloud workloads, and it has to be Docker aware, Kubernetes aware. It has to be able to synchronize. Cloud instances don't live for long, right? So in some cases, if they're built correctly, they'll come up and they'll disappear within seconds, minutes, days, hours. It could be any of the above. But your security solution has to know. It has to understand the context of the actual instance and make sure, or the workload, to make sure it knows whether it should be in a secure state or whether it doesn't even exist anymore. And so those are just things to take into consideration as you're looking to maybe migrate workloads to the cloud and take your existing security controls with you. It really needs to, does it integrate? Does it have API capabilities so that when we're using Ansible, Chef, Puppet to kind of spin things up, can it be spun up as well? Can the security controls be put in place and so on? And does it support all of the platforms that are, that you're going to run into in the cloud? The cloud is much more Linux heavy, right? There's Windows, but a lot of people are taking advantage of Linux, and you got Red Hat, AWS Linux, and so on. Even in Azure, you're seeing a lot of Linux, and so you need to make sure that your security controls can transfer into that environment as well and offer you the same capabilities that we talked about earlier. All right, and in addition, a lot of people are running network security on premise, right? You've got an IPS vendor that you leverage, or IPS capabilities in your NGFW that you're in your next gen firewall that you're leveraging. How do you get those capabilities as you move workloads to the cloud, right? So you really need a solution that's integrated into the cloud environment. It's taking advantage of the features and functions that the cloud provider has provided to security vendors like us to see the traffic, inspect it, be able to identify threats, to be able to identify malicious incoming traffic. And it has to scale, right? These cloud environments are super fast. That's what makes them super beneficial. And we have to be able to inspect, content at 10 gigabits per second as it's transferring, even within the cloud environment. So again, you need to have a security solution. If you're thinking about taking your network security vendor into the cloud, can they integrate in these ways, or questions to ask, right? Okay, and then that last pain point that I mentioned is, hey, we're building new in the cloud. We're not migrating. This team is going ahead and building new applications, but we want to make sure that that they're secure, that they're compliant, that and so on. So when you've got the developers and they're checking in their code and building it and pushing it, and it's going into the cloud, and how can we get integrated into that life cycle? How can we make sure that we're doing the checks and balances that need to be done, because they're moving so fast, right? And this gets into the whole cloud operational excellence area. And so, there's rapid growth in new cloud services. All of, speaking of with my, VP of Threat Research hat on at Trend Micro, so many of the challenges that people run into when they build in the cloud is misconfiguration. I can't say this enough. It happens every day. It's, even if you just go into AWS or Azure and try to spin up a new service, it's going to ask you a bunch of questions. Do you want this public? Do you want this private? This load balancer, this IP. It's, for somebody who's not doesn't have a foundation in networking, those questions may not get answered correctly. They may not take into account the security considerations. And so many, if you read about some of the data breaches that happen related to the cloud, it's almost always misconfiguration that allowed the threat actor to take advantage of it. And so we really want to focus on how do we help people understand when those misconfigurations take place. And that's what Kevin was kind of talking about, which is, here's some of the problems that we do see that the threat actors take advantage of, right? Open storage, open S3 buckets. You read about this weekly, how people have left these open and people just logged in, used a URL, dumped data down. You've got keys not rotated frequently enough, or keys being reused, or keys being published in things like GitHub, You've got cross-account access to a repo, so you think, hey, I use this account here. I didn't realize using the same account here would allow a threat actor to jump from one place to the next. And then just on the deployment side, using your cloud formation templates and the like can if your infrastructure is code and that code has a misconfiguration in place and you deploy it 200 times, in 15 minutes, that's 200 misconfigurations you just deployed, right? So it can really compound the problem versus, the traditional model of, hey, I'm configuring an AD security group and I'm manually putting people into it, then there's eyes on it at that time. The speed of the cloud can certainly make this more of a challenge. And so how we're trying to help customers approach that is what Kevin was talking about, right? And I highly recommend you take a look at that service, the free service. But we're just trying to take compliance frameworks like NIST 853, and we're trying to create a rule framework for it and say, okay, here's how we can go and check all of these things for you inside your cloud infrastructure, just to see, are you in compliance, not in compliance? And we want to provide steps. We've got a great knowledge base here that provides steps to autocorrect and fix these things. And so right now it's mostly focused on AWS and Azure, which I think, going back to the polling question, I think that's what most people here are using. I'm not sure what the multi answers were, but I'm guessing it probably is AWS and Azure, as those seem to be the most popular, at least in our customer base. Someone's asking for the URL for the free service, Kevin, if you want to plug that in, or Lou. We can certainly get
Yep,
that.
I sent it to Brittany.
Perfect. But yeah, I highly recommend, if you're leveraging cloud and you just want to have a quick check in your cloud environment, especially related to compliance, take a look. We're going to just analyze that environment against best practices and see. And just an example, Lou, you mentioned 853. This is a report that you get out of the product, which is specifically for the framework, and to say, hey, can you go through all of the different categories of that framework and identify what we may be missing, what we succeeded, what we passed, what we failed? And so highly recommend you take a look at that tool, and the links in the chat. Okay, and we only talked about 2 use cases. I hear a lot of customer pains. Those were the top 3, and if we had more than an hour, we could continue on. But the Cloud One platform that we have, yeah, we talked about workload security, we talked about network security and conformity, but I'm sure we could arrange to go deeper on container security or application security, right? As you're building these apps, can you put capabilities right natively in the code that's going to identify if it's being, being misused and so on? And then file storage security. If you are using S3 or Azure capabilities for file storage, if you want to scan those for, to see if someone's dumping some malicious code in there, some malware, then we have capabilities that can just kind of connect to an S3 bucket, do a quick scan, give you some information back there. So especially if you're allowing user content to be uploaded, it's always good to just check it to make sure there's nothing malicious in there. And I didn't put this as a pain, but it's a pain I hear a lot. Organizations don't want to deal with 18, 20, 30 security vendors anymore. They're really looking for vendor consolidation. So, they're looking for the security vendors that can bring multiple capabilities to the table. And this is just a quick commercial, a quick plug of our user protection, network defense, and hybrid cloud areas. We have a breadth of capabilities, but they all go back to that, as we talked about, feeding that telemetry and detection information into our XDR platform so that you get that holistic view. If you're running a security team or you want, CISO level reporting to come out of all your security stack, then that's how we try to bubble that up and bring it all together. And I won't spend too much time on the accolades, but we can follow up with that as necessary. All right, there is still 5 minutes. I would like to open it for questions if anybody has anything they're curious about other than the link to the free service. Okay. Lou, anything in closing that you or Kyle want to say? Kevin, anything you want to add before we close out?
I guess my only comment would be is that everything that Mike discussed is on the contract. So all of those components are there. You can see. So it's not that Mike just discussed the entire portfolio that Trend Micro offers. Those things are all available on the contract.
Awesome. I appreciate you. I was gonna echo that thought, Kevin. Definitely. And you know, if anybody on the call, whether you're here or you're watching this at a later date in YouTube or wherever, we are here to help. So if you want to have a deeper dive into one of the technologies that Mike shared today, please let Kyle and I know, and we can get the right resources involved to give you an overview or a deep dive and understand more specifically what your organizational challenges are, so we can help and solve some of those problems. One other thing I will say, and I think it's important, is that when you look at that state contract and you look at the price you're paying for workload security and endpoint security right now, whether you're leveraging Symantec or McAfee, that those prices are probably too high, and we can generally speaking from that contract save you at least half, if not 2 to 3 times what it is that you're currently paying for those tools. So thank you. I appreciate everybody joining today, and hope to hear from you guys soon. Thank you.
And if anybody's interested in the data sheets on the products, I've downloaded the 10 data sheets that are on each one, named them a little more intuitively, I think, plus with a little cheat note that says where it fits in the portfolio. So if anybody's interested in that, just let Kyle or Lou know, and I can zip them up and send them to you.
Great. Thank you all so much again to Trend Micro with CDW for presenting today on a topic I know is always top of mind. I always learn something from Trend when y'all are here with us. So thank you. And I will send a follow-up email by tomorrow morning at the latest with the recording, as well as copies some of our presenting folks here to continue your conversations if you have any questions and would like to get in touch with them. So I hope everyone has a great rest of your afternoon, and thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, team.